Today we talk about Guns of August, published by Worthington Games. It is a two-player game that covers the first weeks of World War I. It comes with a free game, Red Baron, which I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. I have a million things that I want to say about this game, so we keep this introduction short and we start talking about this game immediately. This is the map for the game. It is made of cardstock, and actually it is two sections that you have to put together. Probably when you play you want to use plexiglass to make sure that they don't move around. I cannot do it here to avoid weird reflexes. Also, you may notice that half of this map is dangerously sticking out of my desk because I'm trying to avoid that area there with that light that makes things look really weird. Anyways, so this is the map. It is fully playable. It is pretty functional. Also, you see here the initial setup, or I should say one of the possible initial setups, because each side has several armies. Each army has an HQ, and each HQ has a specific X that it has to be placed in at the beginning of the game. Then the units belonging to the army can be placed in that X or in any X within 3X range. So there's some variety. You can actually try different setups. More or less it will look like this, but still you can try to exploit terrain in different ways. So here you have the French army. Here you have the British reinforcements. We'll enter the game later. It will take them a while before they join the action. Here you have the Belgian units, and all around here you have the Germans that are just ready to attack and advance. This game is based on a chit pool activation system. That means that each headquarter has an activation chit that is placed in a cup, then you draw randomly and you activate the headquarter and the units belonging to the activation chit that has been drawn. And you continue like this, drawing chits and activating headquarters and units until every headquarter has been activated, and at that point the turn is over. So it is a very straightforward, traditional chit pool activation system, no innovations, but it works well, so no complaints either. Fine by me. It is also nice that different headquarters and their matching units have been color-coded. You see black, red, and white there. And of course, that color also matches the activation chit, so that really facilitates gameplay. Units that have been activated can move and or attack. Units can move up to their movement allowance, but that allowance is not printed on the counter. No, it is not that number in that corner. Try not to be too shocked. It is more straightforward than this. Infantry units and headquarters have a movement allowance of 5, and cavalry units have a movement allowance of 7. Units can move up to their movement allowance, and that movement allowance can be influenced by several factors. For example, terrain. For example, moving across a river without using a railroad line will cost you movement points. Most units in good order will project a zone of confusion, it is called in this game, but I would just call it zone of control, in the 6 hexes surrounding them. And entering a zone of control or confusion of the enemy will cost you movement points. However, there are no other penalties, so you can keep moving, even move in another zone of control / confusion, as long as you pay 2 movement points each time that you do so. And of course, you need to have enough. An interesting twist on the movement allowance penalty system here is that movement penalties are not cumulative. You always only pay for the single most expensive penalty that your moving units encounter. So if you are crossing a river, which is 2, and entering an enemy zone of control confusion, which is 2, you do not pay 4, you still only pay 2. And that is something you don't see every day. Starting from turn 9, each side can move 1 unit per turn using railroad movement. A unit can move by railroad starting in supply in a named location or in a location that has a same nationality headquarter, then can move any number of X's that are connected by a railroad, as long as it ends movement in an X that contains a named location that was friendly to that side at the beginning of that movement, or a location that contains the same nationality headquarter. So it is pretty good, but again, it is only 1 unit per turn and only starting from turn 9. This game uses lines of supply. That means that several times the players will have to check to see if the units are in supply. If they are not, they suffer penalties. To be considered in supply, a unit must be able to trace a line of no more than 3 axes, and that line must be free of enemy units, to a railroad axe that then can trace an uninterrupted line of railroad axes to a supply source. Each side has different supply sources, of course. However, units can also trace a line of supply of no more than 3 axes empty of enemy units to their own headquarters, as long as that quarter is in supply itself, and that means that basically headquarters can extend lines of supply by 3 axes. Let's talk about combat. Combat is between adjacent units, it is never mandatory, and it is resolved using the factors that you have printed on the counters. And these 2 factors are artillery, which is the number on the left, and rifles, which is the number on the right. Those factors can be modified depending on several circumstances. For example, if a unit is exhausted, that is, has an exhausted marker on it from a previous combat, then that unit has artillery and rifle scores reduced by half. If the unit is out of supply, same thing, and these are cumulative, so it can be pretty bad if you get both. Attacking across a river X will reduce your rifle score, and defending a mountain X will double the rifle score of the defender. Combat is divided in 2 phases, an artillery phase first and a rifle phase next. First, you sum all the attack and artillery scores and you divide them by the total of the artillery scores of the defender. You find an odds ratio, and then you look at the column corresponding to that odds ratio. You roll a die, cross-reference, and you see the result for the artillery phase, which may be a 0, so nothing happens, the artillery or the attacker didn't do any damage. Maybe an S, meaning that the defender is suppressed, and that means that the attacker will have a bonus on the next table. S1, the defender is suppressed and loses a step. During this phase, the attacker cannot be damaged. During the rifle phase, you repeat the same procedure of finding the odds ratio between the attacker and the defender, but this time you use the rifle scores. Then you may have to modify the column based on several factors. For example, if the defender is suppressed, then you have a column shift to the right. If the defender is outflanked, that means he's being attacked through 2 non-adjacent hex sites, then you have another shift to the right. Earlier in the game, the French units have a penalty that represents the fact that historically, in the early phases of the war, they hadn't figured out that relying excessively on frontal assaults was a bad idea. So until they figured that out, and it takes them a couple of combats before they do so, they have a penalty of 1 shift to the left. Once you have the final column, you roll a die, you cross-reference, and the result may be a step loss indicated by a number. The results on the left are the ones that are applied to the attacker, and the ones on the right are applied to the defender. So you may have a certain number of step losses, or you may have an E that means that the unit is exhausted and will suffer penalties in future combats. And if you look at the table carefully, you see that it simulates attrition pretty well, because you do not have an all-powerful attack that would just annihilate the defender and the attacker can just celebrate. Even the most powerful attacks, which are the ones at 6-1, will inflict some damage on the attacker in 0.5% of the cases, which is pretty huge. You mounted a powerful 6-1 attack in many other games, that would be, that would be it. You don't have to worry about a thing. And here, you still lose a step, and the defender just loses 2. And in the end, after you did all the work to mount an attack this powerful, you had the sense that not much really changed. So you really had this sense of this slow attrition which is eroding the 2 sides. You see your opponent becoming weaker, but you also realize how fast your side is becoming weaker, and it's really a matter of who is going to resist just enough and to be standing while the other side collapses. It may be a little repetitive mechanically, but it works well thematically, and it does create moments of real tension. In this game you also have fortresses, which are the units with this symbol here. I don't have time to talk about them, I just want to acknowledge that you have fortresses here, and there are special rules when it comes to combat against fortresses, and well, just trust me that taking a fortress is harder than to attack a normal enemy, and that means again that here you have even more attrition, and there's gonna be even more blood that will need to be shed before a fortress can be taken. The game continues until you have a supplied French infantry unit in Saarbrücken. If that happens, the LA player is the winner, or until you have a supplied German infantry unit in Paris, at which point the German player is the winner. If neither of those apply, the game continues until the end of turn 27th. At that point, victory is based on the number of French named locations that are under German control and of German named locations that are under French control. The cheat pool activation system keeps things fresh and unpredictable, especially if you have a certain army that you really want to activate to defend an area which is in danger and you don't know if you'll be able to do that on time. The supply system is very interesting because it is based on a net of railroads, which is overall pretty thick, but still there are areas on the map which are not covered, so unless you use a headquarter to extend your supply lines, you're still at risk of getting stuck in the middle of nowhere. But what is more interesting is that the net is thick, but it's not homogeneous. It does have certain neuralgic points that are of key importance because the enemy may be able to cut a large number of supply lines by taking control of that specific point. The map is not neutral. The terrain and again the certain points in the railroad net are of extreme importance. That gives the system of attrition, which is at the core of the game, something that makes it interesting because you do have these combats that last forever, turns and turns, and they seem to go nowhere. But actually, you know that in the back of your mind, you know that losing a position, if the enemy punctures your line in a certain way, in a certain point, actually you may lose an important point of the supply net, and that may have major effects on the rest of the game. So I think that you do have that repetitive, almost hypnotic, maddening process of attrition, but you know that there's something at stake at all times, and that to me keeps the tension pretty high. It is a game with an interesting map, interesting units, interesting map. I'm talking about the aesthetic, but just the possibilities that the landscape creates of having strategies around that. It is a game that I found extremely enjoyable. It is accessible, it is straightforward like other designs by Worthington Games. It has a very good historical feel to it. There are little rules here and there that increase the historical feel of the game. Overall, a game that I really enjoyed and I would recommend it.